So I'm here this summer to learn about different characterization techniques. So you can see this is me with the XPS. Here's me working with a grad student on the TEM. Here I am making some fibers. And I also learned about FTIR and Raman and SEM. So I've really gotten a great exposure to many different techniques. And next, I'll talk a little bit about some background about the project. So this project overall is about polymer-derived ceramics, which are generally made through the controlled thermal decomposition or pyrolysis of organosilicon polymers, such as the ones here on the right. And they can be used in fiber reinforced composites. So that's sort of where my project comes in with these ceramic fibers. And so a main issue with these fibers is that many of these preceramic polymers are not spinnable on their own. So I've been trying to address the spinnability of these preceramic polymers and also looking at their cross-linking behavior. So I was assigned this preceramic oligomer, which is 3-TT-CSC. It's a 3-membered silazane ring. And I was given this because a previous graduate student, Zankan, was working on this similar preceramic oligomer, which is 4-TT-CSC, so it's a 4-membered silazane ring, so quite similar, and we thought that it would be a good comparison point and sort of interesting to see what effect the size of the ring has on all of these spinnability and the cross-linking behavior. So I sort of went off of his recipe and used the same spinning agent as him, which we need to use to be able to spin the fibers. So I used PAA, which has this structure here. And to actually create the preceramic polymer from the oligomer, I mixed the 3-TT-CSZ with dicumyl peroxide, or DCP, at a 1% weight ratio to cross-link it and allow me to make the preceramic polymer. So next, I created a powder where I mixed PAA and 3-TT-CSZ and DCP, which created this paste. And it had a 66% weight ratio. And this allowed me to do some preliminary analysis on this mixture. So I cross-linked this powder by gradually heating it to 160 degrees Celsius in air for 16 hours. And then I pyrolyzed it at 3 different temperatures in argon with a 2 degrees Celsius per minute heating rate. And so I was able to do XPS on these powders. I'm still actually waiting on the 1000 degrees Celsius powder because that was sent out this week. So I don't have that finished yet, but here's the 800 and 1200. And it's interesting to note that the silicon to carbon ratio is increasing. So you can see that the amount of free carbon in these samples decreases as the pyrolysis temperature increases, which is what we had hypothesized. So after making these 3 powder samples, I moved on to working with fibers. So I have ones that I've pyrolyzed at 800 and one's pyrolyzed at 1200. And I'm planning to, in the future, also pyrolyze at 1000, but I didn't really have time to do that. So here's an overview of the procedure that I used to create these fibers, and I'll go into a little bit more detail. So first I began with creating the gel. So I mixed PAA and 3-TT-CSC/DCP. And I found that after experimenting with the ratio that the 33% weight ratio was definitely the best ratio between these two. And I also found that I needed to add some DI water to create this gel and also to allow myself to add some drops of water while spinning the fibers to ensure that the gel didn't dry out too much. So next I'll go on to spinning the fibers. So to start, I would always create these aluminum boats, which are just made of aluminum foil and the aluminum tape, which is great because it just goes straight into the cross-linking oven and it doesn't contaminate my sample or anything. So I draw the fibers with 2 pairs of tweezers and I can place them onto these boats. And as I mentioned before, I add drops of water while I'm spinning the fibers to prevent the gel from drying out. So after spinning the fibers, I cross-link them in air at 160 degrees Celsius for 16 hours. And the cross-linking allows these polymers to become heavily cross-linked, forming a thermoset so that they can survive the pyrolysis temperatures. And here's just some images of the cross-linked fibers. And then from there, I move on to pyrolysis. So I first prepare these fibers for pyrolysis by wrapping them around the graphite paper. So this allows there to be tension in the fibers so that they don't shrink as much. And we use graphite paper because it's just made of carbon, so it's not really contaminating our sample at all. And then after pyrolysis, after preparing them for pyrolysis, I actually put them in the tube furnace for pyrolysis in argon at 800, 1000, or 1200 for 5 minutes with the same heating rate as before, 2 minutes, 2 degrees Celsius per minute. And so here's just some images. I have the fibers at 800 here, and then the fibers at 1200. And I took these images using the SEM. And then so after pyrolysis, I can do a lot of different characterizations. So I'll also note that I did make PAA fibers, which served as a sort of base sample. And I made those with just PAA and water. And so here I have some preliminary XPS data again, which I've just plotted and I'm still working on, but I have the pyrolyzed PAA fibers, the pyrolyzed ceramic fibers at 800 and the pyrolyzed ceramic fibers at 1200. So similar to the powder, you can see that the silicon to carbon ratio is increasing. So the amount of free carbon is again decreasing as the pyrolysis temperature increases, which is again what we expected and is consistent with our data from the powder. And then I also have plotted some preliminary FTIR, which I'm still working on because as you can see, there's some noise in some of these samples. So I might be taking some other scans or looking at other data that I have. But it's good to see that our 3-TTCSD liquid sample has a very clear signal and all of these peaks match up with the molecular formula. So that's definitely good to see. And then I'll mention that the pyrolyzed samples, they're not super helpful because they don't have any hydrogen in them. So there's not really any clear peaks here, but so I'm just gonna be continuing to work on these. So before I open it up for any questions, I'm just gonna go over what I'm gonna be working on in the future, which is cleaning up my FTIR plotting. I'm gonna be doing XPS curve fitting on my high resolution samples. So I've been working on that, but I just need to continue with that. It's a little bit time consuming. And then I'll be doing my Raman plotting. Next, I'll prepare a powder sample with 33% weight ratio of the 3-TTCSD, so it's matching the fibers. And so I have this cross-linked, but I still need to crush it into the powder and pyrolyze it. So that I'm still working on. And then I'll be sending some powder samples for NMR. So yeah, now anyone can let me know if they have any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Son.